Welcome to the Inside Scoop Live podcast, where indie authors get personal about their books, their writing, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt. Join me for some lively conversations with debut indie authors and seasoned veterans alike. It's a great place to find your next amazing read or even get inspired. So sit back and enjoy the show and let me know what you think. Hi everyone, today I'm talking with Mark Shaiken, author of Automatic Stay, the second book in his exciting 3J legal thriller series. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. Mark Shaiken lives with his wife Loren and their dog Emily in Denver, Colorado. He schooled at Haverford College and Washburn University and practiced commercial bankruptcy law for several decades before moving on in 2019 to write, volunteer, and play music. In addition to his latest legal thriller, Automatic Stay, he is the author of And Just Like That, Essays on a Life Before, During, and After the Law, and Fresh Start, a Legal Mystery. Mark is currently working on his book, Unfair Discrimination, and you can learn more about Mark and his work at markshaikenauthor.com. Well, hi, Mark. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Thanks, Sherry, for having me.
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time on your website, and it looks like you are such a busy man, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about you before we talk about your book, Automatic Stay. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a published author?
Sure. I was a lawyer for 4 decades and then made the decision to not go to court anymore. As I was making that decision, I also decided that I really didn't want to retire in the sense that I would sit around and watch TV. So I tried to put together a whole bunch of things that I could do that would keep me almost as busy as I was when I was a lawyer. And writing was one of them. I had written 2 books while I was practicing law. They were law books, but I wrote 2 and I actually enjoyed the process. And part of the decision that I was making as I was leaving the practice of law was that I would start to write books and do it pretty regularly. So my routine is very regular, just like going to work would have been very regular. And I've just really enjoyed it. Yeah.
So writing is actually your post-career career, and you're also an accomplished photographer, and you're a big music fan as well. Are these creative passions of yours something that you became interested in after you left the law, or have they always been a part of your life?
They've always been a part of my life. I started playing piano when I was 4 and then stopped, much to my mom's chagrin, when I was 11 and took up guitar a year later. And that's the principal instrument that has followed me through most of my life. The photography has been around since high school. And both of those are just great outlets, especially if you're a lawyer and you had a bad day in court. Both of those give you some place to go after a day in court. The photography, I'm colorblind, and so photography in my mind is about the only form of visual art I can do because the camera takes care of the color for me.
Oh, wow. So you just see in black and white?
No, colorblind is a really bad way of that the medical community describes it. It's probably better describe it as color confusion. You typically, if you're colorblind, you have difficulty distinguishing certain colors from other ones on the color wheel. So for me, blue and purple are identical, orange and green are identical. So I see color, but I can't always accurately tell people what color it is.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of deadly in Photoshop if you are thinking that you're making the sky bluer and your wife comes over and looks at it and goes, my God, what kind of filter did you have on the camera? The sky is bright purple. Then you know something went wrong.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow. That's interesting. So yeah, I never knew that. You mentioned your writing career started with law books, and because I noticed your first book that I saw on Amazon anyway was was it kind of like a memoir? I know it's a compilation of essays about your time in the legal field. What made you decide to write that book and then from there jump into fiction?
I wanted to do fiction, but I felt like I needed to get the memoir of a not famous lawyer off of my chest first. Huh? So the book kind of wrote itself and probably wrote itself over a 30-year period while I was going to law school, getting out of law school, and then getting into the practice of law. I had made mental notes over almost 4 decades of practicing of things that should I ever actually sit down and write this memoir that I wanted to cover. So the book kind of got planned out over the career and then got written down as soon as the period of euphoria of not going to court anymore ended. Euphoria was not an emotion I had experienced a whole lot of as a trial lawyer. And it's an interesting emotion. It kind of, you wake up in the morning and you're so happy that you don't get anything done. And so I had to wait for that to kind of pass. But once it did, I sat down and I had my list of the topics I wanted to cover, and it kind of wrote itself. And with that out of the way, then I could turn to fiction.
Okay, yeah. Now, so let's talk about your fiction. Tell us a little bit about your book, Automatic Stay.
Automatic Stay continues to follow the career of my star lawyer heroine in the book, who is a partner in a big law firm in downtown Kansas City. So the book's going to be set in Kansas City, as the first two books have been. And we lived in Kansas City for almost 30 years. So that gives me a chance to talk about a city that I know very well, and that, is a little bit of a flyover place in the United States. Nobody really talks about visiting and vacationing in Kansas City. But it's a pretty fascinating place to set a series. It's got a rich jazz history, which is perfect because each of the books, part of the formula will be something musical and something jazz, because Kansas City, it's world famous for barbecue. So there's going to be a small barbecue element to each story. And, my firm was in downtown Kansas City in a high rise. And so you might, if you knew my firm, you might look at my star character's firm and say, ooh, that looks pretty similar.
Okay.
In Automatic Stay, and her nickname is 3J. So in Automatic Stay, 3J represents 6 jazz clubs who have survived COVID, but could not continue to survive without some bankruptcy protection. So they hire her, they file a bankruptcy, and then an anonymous somebody starts a disinformation campaign on social media to get the clubs to shut down. And so the race in the book is to follow along how they figure out whose campaign it is and how they get it to stop so that the clubs don't go under. And then will they be able to do that in time?
I like how you worked COVID into the script, because it's probably pretty hard to write fiction without mentioning COVID and it being any kind of, a realistic fiction tale.
Yeah. So if you're writing a legal thriller and you then bump into COVID and the pandemic, that would change everything if you're going to be accurate and true to what was going on, because no one went to court for 2 years. All the court, like everything else in the world, moved to virtual hearings, Zoom hearings or Zoom equivalent hearings. And so there really wasn't personal contact. People hired lawyers through Zoom video conferences, and lawyers went to court on Zoom, and it changed everything. And I didn't really want to deal with that. So I set it slightly in the future. So the book takes place in 2023, in my fervent hope that by 2023, it really will be not a pandemic anymore and just an endemic. And everybody has begun to go back to in-person work in the law business and has begun to go back to court. So it's sort of happening, but I just really wanted to avoid the brain damage of how would I tell this story if nobody is seeing each other in person and no one's going to court.
Right, exactly. I didn't even think about that part of it, just having court on Zoom. Wow, that's crazy.
In the first book and the second book then bracket the pandemic. So the first book, it takes place slightly in the past, and somebody in that book, I won't give it away, who ends up going to jail. And the last scene in the book is that COVID has now struck, and it's decimating jails and as well as nursing homes. And so that book sort of touches on the beginning of COVID in the end of that story. And then I skip a year and a half or 2 years, and then Automatic Stay kind of picks up where we all are in the world, hopefully, past that problem.
Yeah.
In 2023. Yeah.
So what inspired the actual storyline for this novel?
I can't actually say where all these stories come from. Some of that, I try to make sure that none of the stories are based on anything that really happened to me in my practice. Number one, I don't want to even touch on giving away client confidences or writing a book where a client would pick it up and read it and say, well, that's me. I don't want that to happen. But surprisingly, the bankruptcy world is full of interesting characters, interesting plots in real life. When people owe lots of money, it alters how they, conduct themselves in life. And so it's really not that hard to come up with a somewhat plausible plot line, which is my hope that it's completely plausible, because the one thing that I don't like and this is just me, if I'm watching a legal thriller movie or a legal thriller TV show or reading a legal thriller book, sometimes I get angry at the TV or the book because it's not portraying certain parts of the law, how it really plays out accurately, in my opinion. So I want things to be accurate, although hopefully not overkill for the non-lawyers that are reading it. But I do want it to be accurate and at the same time have that lend to the plausibility of the plot.
Yeah, because what we see on TV, although we know it's fiction, we tend to think, okay, that's the way it really happens. So, and probably even reading a book, I think a part of our brain just kind of says, okay, that's the way it is. And, we forget it's fiction sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, there's some that translate pretty well, and I'm happy with it. Like The Lincoln Lawyer, which is a Michael Connelly series, has now made it to this. And I watched that because I love Michael Connelly, and I thought that was pretty accurate. But I can come up with other shows that I can't watch because they're not accurate and it drives me crazy.
Yeah. Now, Automatic Stay is book 2 in your 3J Mystery series. Was it your plan to write a series when you first began writing?
Yeah. So I kind of sketched out 4 plots. So I have 2 more in me. I'm writing the 3rd one now, and the 4th one is just in the taking notes as I think of things kind of stage. But after the 4 come out, then I'll sort of sit back and see if I have a 5th with 3J in it, or if I'm going to change up and try to move to a different series.
Okay.
But you're right what you know. So my guess is that as I stick with fiction, it'll be something to do with law, because that is what I know.
Yeah. Now, 3J, tell us about her. Start with, how did you come up with her name? I love that.
So the middle name, her name is Josephina Jillian Jones, and you learn in the new book that her dad calls her Joe, but everybody else calls her 3J. Jillian was a name when my wife got pregnant that we were going to name our son if he was our daughter. And so for whatever reason, just always liked that name. Josephina, I'd known one going back to college and just liked the name. And it's kind of a complicated set of syllables, and I just like the way it kind of rolls off the tongue. But when you put those 2 together, that's a mouthful. So I gave her a really simple 3rd name.
Yeah. And I love how you came up with 3J. I feel like that's pretty creative. Wow, I never would have thought of something like that.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from, but it's a nice nickname. It's an easy one.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
So what motivates 3J?
So 3J is an African-American female partner in a big law firm in downtown Kansas City. So she's hopefully, as the books come out and the story of her life develops a bit more, she's, pretty complicated. She grew up on the poverty line in New Orleans and made it out to go to a fancy liberal arts college in Washington, Whitman College, and then made her way to Kansas to go to law school, and then just sort of stayed when the law firm interviewed her. What you learn about her is that she joined the firm at a time when diversity really wasn't front and center in anything the firm was interested in, which is true for many of the large law firms. They've certainly gone whole hog in on diversity and are scrambling to try to make sure that their lawyers represent something of what the population, in the United States looks like, which is great. But, she talks in the 2nd book about how, in order to stay at a law firm, you have to have a sense of purpose, which most lawyers have fairly easily, trust and a sense of belonging. And she didn't get much of a sense of trust or belonging when she joined the firm, because there really weren't very many people of color, and certainly not women of color at the firm. And, things are a little better now, and she's certainly made partner and the firm loves her. But some of what has gone through are things that I would say that I've observed women and people of color have gone through in law firms. Now, as I say that, I'm not a woman and I'm not a person of color. So I can't really have 3J reflect things that I think people of color or women feel when they get into those situations, because I'm never going to be able to stand in those kinds of shoes. I have to respect that. But at the same time, diversity is important to me, and I want to make sure that my lead character is diverse. That was important to me.
Yeah. So what prompted your decision to use a female person of color as your lead?
Well, if I wanted the lead to be diverse, that person wasn't going to look like me. And so I still have a lot of friends at the old firm who are women, and some who are people of color. And, it's hard enough to make your way through a law firm and rise to the level of being admitted as a partner, let alone if you're doing that and you don't feel a sense of trust and belonging. And I always found that to be compelling and thought it would be a good thing to do and a good time in the United States to do it. It's interesting because I get asked about this in different ways when I give interviews or even talk. And some people have thought it was a great idea. No one's told me it was a terrible idea, and nobody's called me out for doing it. But my comment that I tend to make is, well, if I can only write a book where the character is like me, then all of my characters are going to be, aging white men, and that won't be much of a book. And so the alternative is to try to have the book reflect something of what America looks like. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wonder about the challenges of writing in that female voice. What were some of the hurdles you faced, and how did you handle those challenges?
Well, for most of the time that 3J is doing her thing, she's a lawyer, and she just happens to be a Black female lawyer. So for most of the time, she's doing her job. So her job would be no different than my job. So when she's in court, she's saying the same things I would have said in bankruptcy court. When she's taking a deposition, as she does in automatic stay, as sort of one of the moments in the book, I hope the deposition accurately reflects what it's like to be in a deposition. I think it does. And then B, what she's doing is what any lawyer would do, regardless, whether they're green, red, purple, orange, whatever their color is and whatever their sexual preference might be. They still have to go and do that. And where it comes up is in some of her discussions with her mentor in the book, who's William Pascal, who's in his mid to late 60s in the book. She's in her 40s. And what I think is one of the interesting things is that's her confidant, because that's who taught her bankruptcy, that's who brought her into the firm, and that's who, in his own way, helped her find a way to feel like she belonged and had trust.
And is he an older white male?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Nice.
Somebody has accurately noticed that he sounds a lot like me, which is okay and not a bad thing. And there are certainly parts of me in him, but he's not me.
Yeah. So obviously your experience in the legal world translates into your fictional work through your characters and events. Does that leave a lot of research to do? What does preparation for writing your stories look like?
I use a little app called OneNote. It's actually free, but it's made by Microsoft, and you can have it on your phone and you can have it on your computer, and they sync. And I use that to take notes, or as my wife calls it, zoning out in the middle of doing something. When something comes into my mind, out comes the phone, and I got to write it down immediately. I think in the older days, I would have had a pad next to the bed and wake up at 2 a.m. and scribbled something down and hoped it was understandable in the morning when I woke up. So I use that to write a very extensive outline and try to sketch out the new characters in the book and what they're going to be like. I don't necessarily need to do research for that, but I do like to have as much on paper or electronic paper as I can. In the new book, one of the characters has a medical affliction, I'll call it without giving it away. And that one, I did a bunch of research. While I've always been fascinated by that particular affliction that the character has, I needed to be accurate again. And so I interviewed a psychiatrist, and there's some documentaries that I watched for that. So that kind of research I did. The other thing that I do research is the historical look backs of Kansas City, hopefully are very accurate, and that does require research. And then there's because it's jazz clubs, there's a lot of jazz references in the book, and those also required research to make sure that what I thought I remembered about one performer or another was correct. So there's some references to Count Basie in the book. There's some references to Clark Terry, so some famous jazz musicians who had connections in one way or the other to Kansas City. So those I want to be accurate.
Yeah. Have you had the opportunity to go back to Kansas City for the work on any of your books?
Funny you ask. My wife and I just went back for a long weekend so that I could run around with a camera and take pictures of things that I want in the new book.
Oh, nice.
So now I have a whole series of iPhone pictures to go through to make sure that if I'm describing a particular scene in Kansas City, that it's accurate. There's a bar that repeats in the book, which I call O'Brien's, which is in the book. It's set at the corner of Westport Road and Pennsylvania, and Kansas Cityans will know that that's a famous bar, but called Kelly's. And Kelly's is one of the oldest remaining standing buildings in Kansas City. And during the Civil War, and post-Civil War, had a fairly prominent role in Kansas City history and in slave trade, unfortunately. So it's a kind of cool place to not only have 3J and Pascal meet to talk about the week in review on Fridays, but also it's a doorway to be able to throw in some Kansas City history.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Wow, that is an old building. How much of your story came as a surprise as you were writing? You said you do extensive outlines, so do any of your characters end up going in a direction that you hadn't planned on?
Yeah, they do. Hopefully it's not a huge, U-turn in the middle, because that would be disappointing, that I did all this planning and plotting out how I was going to tell the story, and then I went completely divergent. But there are changes. The way dialogue comes out on paper may not always be how, in my mind's eye, I thought it would be coming out in a critical scene. And the whole notion of writing dialogue, which is not something you do at all as a lawyer, of course, has become very interesting to me. I don't actually know how other authors do it, but I can sit at the computer and talk to myself in both roles of the two people who are talking and having the dialogue. Once that starts, it doesn't always come out the way I may have envisioned it, but what they're talking about doesn't change that much.
Oh, I love that you do that. That's really good to read it out loud when you're done to make sure it sounds like, what you intended. You can tell if the dialogue is stilted.
Yeah. So the deposition, which is a kind of dialogue in the law, where the lawyer is examining a witness, asking questions, and the witness is answering the questions. When I did that, the back and forth expanded in the book to beyond what I had envisioned. But I did talk both roles out, so I can hear myself asking the question and hear the witness try not to answer it, and the lawyer follow up, and then the witness answer it. So it's a different kind of dialogue, but the same way that it kind of got down on paper.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm curious, what kind of feedback have you received from your readers? As the second book, you must have a growing fan base.
So far, it's all good. The book hasn't been out that long yet, and there's, I'm sure, a whole bunch of people who bought it that haven't read it yet. So far, it's good. I think that they like the plot. The first book was about somebody who was supposedly hiding assets. That Fresh Start was the first book, and it was about a real estate tycoon who filed bankruptcy and then didn't disclose all of his assets, which is a felony under federal law. And that book generated a fair number of people who asked, well, does that ever really happen? The second book, where you have hospitality industry needing to file bankruptcy because of COVID, happened so much over the last 2+ years that no one is asking me, does that ever really happen? Because we've all lived through it. So the contrast of the kind of question between book one and book two has been interesting to me. But back to book one, it does happen. Boris Becker, the famous tennis star, filed bankruptcy in Britain and didn't disclose all of his assets on purpose and got caught, and he's going to end up going to jail. So
oh, wow. I didn't know that. So what do your family and friends think about your writing, and how do they support your writing career, and how did it feel sharing your work with them for the first time?
The first book, and just like that, the memoir of the Not Famous Lawyer, my wife lived through it, so I don't think anything in the book was terribly surprising to her. And that book, I kind of had her read most of the essays as I went along. The second book, Fresh Start, I finished and she read it before I did anything with it. And she gave me some comments, which are great. A lot of the comments, which I really appreciated, were, too much law, too much technical stuff. Only law wonks are going to want to read it if you do this. So I tried to tone it down, which was really very helpful. The third book, I didn't give her to read until it came out. So she read it with everybody else that bought it in the first week.
Oh, wow.
So I've sort of used her in different ways. I don't use advanced readers to get feedback. I don't know why. I know authors do that, and it's talked a lot about in different discussion groups on the internet, but I just haven't done that. I think it's because I'm finding writing to be kind of a private thing, and I'd rather risk getting negative feedback after the book comes out than getting an entire rewrite from
Mm.
person A and a different rewrite from person B and a different rewrite from person C.
Yeah.
That'd be a little overwhelming. So I'm not using that form of pre-release feedback. But the family has really been very supportive, whether it's as the book is going along or before the book comes out or after the book comes out. So they seem to find it kind of cool that I got to actually do something that I'd talked for decades about wanting to do, which is sit down and write.
Yeah. That's very cool. It's hard to write a book.
It is. It is. But I mean, I get up, I sit down at the computer at 8:30, 5 to 6 days a week, and my deal with myself is I'll write for at least 2 hours, even if I only have 5 words come out. I sit there. Normally, I have more than 5 words come out, and if I'm on a roll, I don't have to stop after 2 hours. I can keep going.
Oh, wow.
And the first book took 9 months to write. The second book took a little more than 4 months to write, and the third book seems like it's on pace for the same, 4 month kind of turnaround to get it out the door to the editor.
Oh, that's amazing. I feel like with the first book, you're kind of setting up your characters and all that, and actually setting up the whole series. So, with the subsequent books, it's probably easier to just focus on the story itself.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I'm learning is how much in the next book does it refer back to things that happened in book one or book two? Because you don't want to, have pages and pages of things that were book one history kind of things
Right.
that then get referred to in book two or book three. So that's a little tricky, and it's probably going to get worse as I add books to the series. Hopefully that can be read standalone. That's my goal. I mean, it'd be better if somebody knew what happened in book one and book two to get to book three, but hopefully they could read book three and not have to have read the first two of the 3J series.
Right. Because the cases are different in each book.
Correct. Although the judge will be the same judge,
Oh.
and that's kind of fun. And he'll have a different law clerk between the first book and the second book. And the new law clerk will stay longer, and her character will get developed a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah.
When the first, I clerked for a bankruptcy judge when I got out of law school. And when the first one came out, he asked if the judge in the book was him. And I kind of chuckled and said, if it was you, would that be a good thing or a bad thing, before I answered the question? But there are parts of the Judge Robertson in the series that are like the judge I clerked for. Very wise and very thoughtful.
That's funny. I think sometimes people want to see themselves in your books, and then at other times they kind of worry. It's like, you always hear about don't make me mad, I'll write about you in my next novel,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So it sounds like you really enjoy the writing process. Would you say that's your favorite part? And is there anything you wish you had known before you actually started writing?
I think I like the four things that I sort of fill my day with equally. I get to serve on nonprofit boards, and that makes me really happy because I can start helping people in small ways, and I enjoy that. I didn't have a lot of time to do that as a practicing lawyer, and didn't do enough of it, and now I can do as much as I want, and so that makes me happy. Photography is really important to me, mostly sports photography for the last 15 or 18 years. And for me, anyway, there's really nothing better than going out and photographing Major League Soccer, which is what I kind of do during the spring, summer, and fall.
Oh, wow.
So I actually like all of them equally. And music, until I am too arthritic to play, will be very important. The book thing, though, is the new thing in the mix. So, it's shiny still.
Yeah.
I enjoy that. And I hope that stays. I hope I don't ever look at it like it's just a drudgery kind of thing to do, because that'd be sad. But right now I'm just really loving it. So it's great.
That's wonderful. So what's next for you? You mentioned you're working on your third story in your 3J mystery.
Right. So each of the books' name comes from something involved in the bankruptcy code. So Fresh Start is a bankruptcy phrase. Automatic Stay is a very important bankruptcy phrase. The new book is going to be entitled Unfair Discrimination, which surprisingly is a phrase right out of the bankruptcy code. Only bankruptcy could suggest that there's some kind of discrimination that's okay, as long as it's just not unfair discrimination. That kind's not okay. And so that the new book is going to be about a rural agricultural belt, real estate, not a developer as much as somebody who is buying and selling real estate in the agricultural belt. And he and his wife are going to make their way up to Kansas City to hire a bankruptcy lawyer and file bankruptcy. In this book, 3J is not going to be their lawyer. She's going to be the lawyer for all the unsecured creditors who this couple owes money to. And the book is going to have an element of, I guess the way to describe this is right-wing, fringe, domestic terrorist element to it.
Oh, wow.
So hopefully something that is topical.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so you said you're online to finishing it in the same amount of time you finished Automatic Stay. So where does that place things?
Well, what I've learned is to be patient with the next stage after I write it, which is the editing part, because that can take longer at times. So I think what I'm learning is that the book can come out something like 6 to 9 months after I finish my part. And I was going to say first draft, but it's not a first draft. It's more like an 8th or 10th draft, because writing is really all about rewriting and editing yourself before you let anybody else have at it.
Right.
So that seems to be a fair turnaround window between getting a design for the cover that I like, and then getting the book formatted and going through the editing phase, and then getting it out on Amazon and Ingram Spark for other book distributors.
Yeah. Now, did you do all that yourself?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, I think it would be insane for me to consider that I would edit myself. That, at least for me, that would be a silly idea, because you really do need somebody else to take your work and say, you can say this more efficiently. This doesn't make any sense, or it's not consistent. So if I've made a mistake, I'm probably not going to catch it. So getting a real editor to do his or her thing is important. And I don't have the skill to do a book design. So those two components are important to the indie authors of the world. And there's no end of editors and designers out there to do things for you. So there's lots to choose from.
Yes, I absolutely agree. You need an editor. You need a different set of eyes, because you've read your book how many times? You're not going to catch it. You're right.
Right.
And if someone else can design a cover, hire the professionals, do it. 'Cause it's one more thing you don't have to do, and you can focus on the parts that you like, the writing and I'm sure you love marketing and all that, right?
Well, I might write a book someday of all the things not to do if you're going to be an indie author, because I feel like I'm very quickly making a good list of all of those things. But I try out different things for each book, because there's no end of marketing things that you can try. The first 2 books I wrote when I was a lawyer, the law books, I had a publishing company, and boy, was I unknowingly spoiled at the time, because all I had to do was deliver the words. They'd edit it. They'd develop the book. They'd make the cover. They'd format the book, they'd publish the book, and they sent me a check every quarter. And I thought that's how all publishing works. In the modern era, where it's pretty hard for a starting out author like me to have a publishing company, you're on your own, and it's very easy to publish. Amazon has changed the world in that regard. But that leaves the harder part, which is what do you do once you've published it? Still kind of daunting.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing a bit about yourself and your work. Is there anything else you wanted to add today?
No, this has been great. Thanks so much for having me on. And, you can go to markshaikenauthor.com and connect with me there, join a mailing list, find the books, read some sample chapters, see some of the reviews the books have been getting. And I just really appreciate that you asked me to come on your show.
Thank you for joining me today for my interview with Mark Shaiken, author of Automatic Stay. You can learn more about Mark and his work at markshaikenauthor.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews on InsideScoopLive.com.